At a family dinner, my parents demanded I fund my brother's kids after his divorce. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Halfway through dessert, my mother slid a handwritten budget across the table and said, "You're paying for Jason's kids now." She didn't say it like a question. She said it the way people announce the weather. My father sat at the head of the table with his hands folded, not looking at me, which somehow made it worse. Jason kept his eyes on his plate and pushed a piece of chicken around like he was too ashamed to speak, which would have worked better if I hadn't known him my entire life. I looked down at the paper. Rent contribution, after-school care, groceries, school clothes, copays. A monthly total circled twice in blue ink. $1,850. I actually laughed, because my brain refused to process that my parents had invited me over for Sunday dinner to hand me my brother's post-divorce bills. Is this a joke? Diane crossed her arms. You're 32 years old, Caleb. You have a stable job, no children, and no one depending on you. I depend on me, I said. Tom finally looked up. Your brother is drowning. Jason exhaled like the victim in all this. I didn't ask them to do this. That's funny, I said, tapping the neat bullet points. Because this looks very premeditated for something nobody asked for. My mother's mouth tightened. Those children did not ask for their parents' marriage to fall apart either. That landed exactly where she wanted it to. Jason's 2 kids flashed through my head. Backpacks too big for their shoulders. That tired look children get when adults turn their lives into a battlefield. I hated that she knew I cared. I hated even more that she was using it. For 10 years I'd built a careful life. I worked as an MRI tech at St. Andrews. I covered extra shifts, paid down debt, skipped vacations, and finally signed a lease on an apartment that didn't smell like old pipes and mildew. I had savings because I'd gone without. I had stability because I'd never once expected anyone to catch me when I fell. Jason, meanwhile, fell in every direction and somehow always landed on a couch someone else paid for. Say something, Diane snapped. So I did. No. Jason looked up then, and what I saw on his face wasn't shame. It was calculation, and that scared me more than the budget sheet. Being the reliable son had started so early in my family that I used to think it was my personality instead of an assignment. Jason was 3 years older, handsome in the effortless way that made teachers forgive him and girlfriends defend him. He could charm waitresses, borrow money with a grin, and turn every stupid decision into a sad story about stress or bad timing. If he broke something, I got asked why I hadn't stopped him. If he forgot a birthday, my mother would say he had so much on his mind. If I forgot anything, it became proof that success had made me arrogant. When I was 14, Jason wrecked Dad's car backing out of the driveway too fast. Tom yelled for 20 seconds, then spent the evening teaching him how insurance worked. A week later, I got grounded for losing a school hoodie. At 17, Jason failed 2 classes and still got a graduation party because he'd been through a lot. At 17, I got a lecture for asking if I could commute to community college to save money. Don't make your life small, Diane said then, as if caution were a moral failure. Funny thing was, the second my caution benefited them, it became noble. The latest cut came 6 months before that dinner. We were at my parents' house for Tom's birthday, and Jason had shown up 40 minutes late with a bottle of supermarket wine and some story about traffic. I'd come straight from a double shift, still smelling faintly like hospital disinfectant, and Diane had asked me to help carve the roast because you're the one who can be counted on. Later that night, Tom had clapped me on the shoulder in front of Jason and said, "Caleb's done fine for himself. Boring, but fine." Jason laughed. Yeah, Caleb's the king of safe. Everybody smiled like that was affectionate. I smiled too, because that's what I'd been trained to do when my family reduced me to a function. The dependable one, the useful one, the son who didn't make scenes. But sitting at that table with their budget in front of me, something clicked into place with a cold little sound. They had not invited me because they loved me. They had invited me because I was solvent, predictable, and easy to shame. I wasn't their son in that moment. I was the emergency fund they thought they were entitled to. After the dinner ambush, my mother started pushing a clean version of Jason's divorce like she was reading from a church bulletin. Melissa had become cold. Jason had been blindsided. The kids were unstable. Money was tight. Every time Diane told it, the story got softer and more flattering to my brother. Tom backed her up in that low, reasonable voice of his that made manipulation sound like wisdom. Divorce changes people, he told me over the phone 2 days later. Melissa isn't thinking clearly. Neither is Jason if he thinks I'm paying his rent. It's not rent, he said quickly. It's support. The word sat there between us. Support. Like I was refusing chemotherapy instead of rejecting a family shakedown. Jason called that night with his own version. He sounded wrecked in the polished way some people do when they know exactly how broken they should sound. She turned the kids against me. Caleb. They're 6 and 8. You know what I mean. No, I don't. He sighed. I'm just trying to survive. Lawyers drain me. She wants full control. Mom and Dad are terrified the kids are going to suffer. There were holes in that story big enough to drive a truck through. Jason had never cared about full control unless someone else was paying for it. He also hated paperwork, deadlines, and anything that required steady effort. The idea that he'd suddenly become a martyr to custody logistics did not fit the brother I knew. Still, I almost let myself believe him, because the alternative was uglier. The alternative was that my parents knew he was lying and thought I should absorb the cost. Then Diane texted me a photo of the kids in their winter coats outside school. No caption, just the image. 2 little faces looking tired and confused while adults made decisions over their heads. 5 minutes later, another text came in. We can't let pride hurt them. It was such a manipulative move that my hands actually shook. Not because it was subtle, because it wasn't. My mother had stopped trying to persuade me and started trying to make me feel morally contaminated for saying no. I stared at that school photo too long, and then I noticed something small. Jason was wearing a brand new watch in the corner of the picture. The next Sunday, Diane called and told me to come back for dinner so we could speak like adults. I almost didn't go. Then she added, Jason's here, and we've worked out a fair plan, which was such an insane sentence that curiosity overrode self-preservation. The fair plan was printed this time. Tom had typed it up and put it in a plastic folder like we were closing on a house. There were columns, due dates, proposed transfer methods, a section labeled short-term family assistance, as if capital letters could convert extortion into policy. I didn't sit down. You made a spreadsheet. Jason rubbed his forehead. Can we not do this theatrically? I laughed once. You ambushed me with an invoice. Diane pointed to a line item. Daycare increased after the separation. Then why does this include your electric bill? I asked. Nobody answered immediately. It was only 1 second, maybe less, but it was enough. Tom spoke first. The household has had to absorb extra strain. So this is about your bills too? It's about the children, Diane snapped. No, I said. It's about everybody deciding my paycheck belongs to the family. Jason pushed his chair back. Must be nice, Caleb. Must be nice to sit there and act superior because your life is easier. Easier, I said. I worked every weekend for 3 years. Oh, congratulations, he shot back. You followed rules and got boring. Tom raised a hand, but he wasn't calming Jason down. He was calming me down, which had always been his specialty. Jason erupted. I was expected to regulate. Then my mother said the line I think she'd been saving. You don't even have kids. What exactly are you saving all that money for? For 1 second, nobody moved. There it was. The real family doctrine. Anything I had not already spent on a spouse or children was apparently community property. I said, very carefully, I'm saving it for my life. The front doorbell rang. Tom frowned. Are you expecting someone? A woman's voice floated in from the entry after he opened the door. Delivery for Jason Miller. Jason went pale before the envelope even touched his hand. That was the moment I knew the budget wasn't the real emergency. I left before dessert, before anyone could rewrite what I'd just seen. Jason called after me from the porch. Nothing. I turned around. Then why do you look like you're about to throw up? He held the envelope against his leg like that would hide the return address. It's just paperwork from the attorney. About what? Why do you care? He snapped, then caught himself and lowered his voice. Look, this is already humiliating enough. Behind him, Diane appeared in the doorway. Caleb, don't make this uglier than it already is. That almost made me laugh. As if I were the one who had printed up a payment plan and weaponized 2 children over baked ziti. I drove home angry enough to miss my exit. Halfway back to my apartment, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. I hope you can live with yourself if those kids lose stability. Then Jason texted, don't talk to Melissa. She wants to destroy me. I read that 3 times. Not because it scared me. Because it was too specific. I hadn't mentioned Melissa. He had. People usually reveal what they're afraid of before they realize they're doing it. By Monday morning, the pressure campaign had started in full. My aunt in Arizona texted that family is all we have. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 8 months sent me a paragraph about how divorce hurts children most. Diane called during lunch and cried so hard I had to pull the phone away. Tom left me a voicemail telling me not to let resentment cloud moral duty. Jason stayed mostly silent, which felt planned. By Tuesday, guilt had turned into suspicion. I pulled up the school district website during a break at work and checked after-school program fees. They were a third of what my mother had listed. I looked up average copays under Melissa's employer plan because I remembered she worked for a dental group with good benefits. Again, they didn't fit. I remembered the watch in that photo. Steel band, dark face, not cheap. Jason had also shown up to dinner in fresh sneakers and a jacket I'd seen online because I'd almost bought the cheaper version for myself last fall and decided I couldn't justify it. Everyone told me he was drowning. But drowning men usually don't accessorize like that. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text said, "This is Melissa. Jason said you might contact me." He sounded worried. I stared at it so long the screen dimmed. We had never been close. Melissa was polite, capable, and sensibly guarded around my family. Jason called her intense whenever she asked where their money had gone. I typed back, "He told me not to talk to you." 3 dots appeared. Then, that should tell you enough. We met the next afternoon in a coffee shop near the pediatric clinic where she'd just taken the younger kid for an ear infection follow-up. She looked exhausted in the way that can't be faked. Bad ponytail, dark circles, a folder bulging with forms. Not dramatic, just tired. "Thank you for coming," I said. She gave a small shrug. "I almost didn't. Your mother blames me for weather patterns." That made me smile despite myself. For a while we circled each other. She asked how my parents were spinning things. I asked what she wanted me to know. Finally, she slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of daycare invoices, insurance summaries, and a temporary custody schedule. I read in silence, getting hotter by the page. "These aren't the numbers they gave me." "I know," she said. "Not even close." "I know." Jason had weekends and one overnight midweek, not the near total access he'd implied. Melissa was already covering the children's insurance through work. She was paying the school lunch account. She had receipts for uniforms, field trip fees, and prescriptions. Jason was behind on 2 child support transfers, not because the amount was impossible. Bank screenshots in a court filing showed restaurant charges, concert tickets, ride shares, and an electronics purchase days before he told my parents he couldn't afford inhaler copays. "When he says he's broke," Melissa said quietly, "what he means is he's angry his life costs more now." I sat back, sick with recognition. Why are my parents pushing me so hard? She hesitated. "Because he told them you'd be easier than court." That sentence hit like ice water. Easier than court. Easier than accountability. Easier than making Jason act like a father instead of a son everyone kept rescuing. Then Melissa pulled out one more page. My father's name was on the transfer memo. I thought Melissa was mistaken until she pointed to the date. February 14th. Electronic transfer, $2,000. Memo line, bridge from Dad. I looked up. Dad gave Jason money? She nodded. At least twice. Jason used the screenshots in court to argue he had family support and temporary cash issues. That helped him delay enforcement. My stomach dropped. So while they were telling me the kids needed help, they were already subsidizing him. "Yes," she said. "And if I had to guess, they don't want to keep doing it themselves." The room felt bright. I thought about the plastic folder, the bullet points, my mother acting scandalized that I would hesitate. None of this had been panic. It had been succession planning. They were trying to transfer Jason's upkeep from older parents to the son they'd trained never to say no. Melissa watched my face carefully. "Caleb, I'm not asking you to choose my side. I'm asking you not to let them turn this into a lie about the children." I appreciated that more than I could explain. No dramatics. No demand that I denounce anyone. Just facts. So I started asking for facts. "Does Jason really not have money?" "He has money," she said. "He just spends it before it becomes responsibility." "Did he get blindsided by the divorce?" Her expression hardened for the first time. "He got served after I found messages with a woman he'd been seeing on and off for 8 months. I closed my eyes. "And the reason the daycare number is inflated?" He included his own apartment shortfall in the kid costs. He did that in a draft email to your mom. I only know because he accidentally sent the wrong screenshot to the group app once, then deleted it. Do you still have it? Melissa reached into the folder again and slid me a printed screenshot of a text thread. There it was. Jason writing to Diane. If Caleb covers $1,500 monthly, I can breathe again. Just tell him it's mostly for the kids. Timestamp, 11:14 p.m. 5 nights before the first dinner. I read it twice. Then again. I wanted to drive straight to my parents' house and throw that page onto the table. But anger without strategy was Jason's method, not mine. So instead I asked the question that mattered most. What else had they buried before billing me for Jason's life? Melissa didn't answer right away. She stirred her coffee, though it had already gone cold. Your parents know about the affair, she said. Not everything. Enough. I felt my jaw lock. Since when? Since before I filed. That shouldn't have shocked me. Maybe nothing about Diane and Tom should have anymore. Still, hearing it felt like finding rot under the floorboards of your childhood house. Melissa explained it plainly. She had found messages in Jason's tablet, confronted him, and told him to leave for a week. Instead of apologizing or telling the truth, he had run straight to our parents and framed it as marital instability. By the time Melissa spoke to them, Diane was already telling her not to throw away a family over private mistakes. Private mistakes. That was my mother's phrase for any betrayal committed by the child she protected. And the money? I asked. Some of it went to legal fees, Melissa said. Some went to rent. Some went to a down payment on a motorcycle. I almost laughed, because otherwise I might have put my fist through the sugar display. A motorcycle. She nodded once. Used. But not cheap. That made the whole thing uglier. Jason was not choosing between his children and starvation. He was choosing between adulthood and vanity, and my parents had volunteered me to make it painless. Melissa showed me one more screenshot, this one from social media. Jason standing in a friend's garage with one hand on a black bike, grinning like a teenager, captioned, "Needed one good thing this year." The post had been deleted, but she'd taken it before it vanished because she said she'd started documenting everything once she realized he kept rewriting reality. The date stamp was 4 days after he missed the larger child support transfer. I stared at the image until it blurred. Do my parents know about this? I sent it to your mother, Melissa said. She told me men sometimes make reckless purchases when they're grieving. That was when something in me changed shape. Until then, I'd still been trying to separate Jason's selfishness from my parents' pressure. Still trying to imagine they were misled. They weren't misled. They were recruiting. Then Melissa leaned forward and told me the part she'd almost left out. The first time your mom called me after the separation, Melissa said, she didn't ask what the kids needed. She asked whether you knew. I looked at her. Knew what? That Jason had no plan. That he'd been borrowing from them. That they were tired. Melissa's voice stayed calm, but the words hit hard. Diane hadn't reached out as a worried grandmother. She'd reached out like an accountant trying to assess whether a better funding source had already been notified. I went home with copies of everything in a manila folder on my passenger seat and sat in my apartment parking lot for almost an hour. I watched people carry groceries inside, watched a kid wobble down the sidewalk on a scooter, watched normal life continue while mine rearranged itself into something meaner and much clearer. When I finally went upstairs, I spread the pages across my kitchen table in date order. Jason's texts to Diane, the inflated budget, the transfer from Tom, the custody schedule, the deleted motorcycle post, the daycare receipts that proved my mother's numbers were fiction. Individually, each piece was ugly. Together, they formed a picture I could no longer soften to protect myself. My parents were not reacting to a crisis. They were managing Jason's consequences and trying to bill me for the service. The worst part was how familiar it felt. Once I saw the pattern, I could trace it backward through my whole life. The rides I gave him after he lost his license, the rent loan I never got back at 24, the time Diane volunteered my spare room to store Jason's furniture without asking because you're the organized one. They had always translated my discipline into availability. If I had something, it was shareable. If Jason lacked something, it was urgent. That night Tom called. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was measured. Your mother is upset. Your mother is a phrase toddlers use when they've broken a lamp. He ignored that. We need to keep this family from breaking apart. I looked at the papers on my table. Then maybe stop lying to me. Silence. Not outrage. Not confusion. Silence. It lasted just long enough to confirm everything. When he finally spoke again, his tone had changed. Be very careful who you listen to next. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the kid's school photo over my mother's budget sheet. That was the hardest part. If this had only been about Jason, saying no would have felt clean. But it wasn't. 2 actual children were in the middle of this, and the adults knew exactly how to make that hurt. At work the next morning, I positioned patients, checked bands, explained scans in the same calm voice I always used, and wondered whether stability was just another word for being selected for extraction. By lunch, I'd already drafted 3 versions of a text offering to pay the school lunch account directly. I deleted all 3. Not because the children didn't need support, but because I finally understood that anything I offered without structure would be treated as the opening payment on a lifelong subscription. Melissa and I spoke again that evening from my car outside the grocery store. I don't want the kids punished because their father is selfish, I said. I know, she said. That's why I answered you. What do they actually need? She didn't hesitate. Consistency. Their school account is current. Their rent is covered. I could use help with summer camp later, maybe, but I'm not asking yet. What I need right now is for your family to stop telling everyone I'm starving my children. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. So the emergency is fake. The emergency, she said, is that Jason wants the same lifestyle with fewer obligations. There it was again, plain and cruel. He wasn't destitute. He was inconvenienced. That should have made my decision easier. Instead, it made it heavier, because now I had to choose not just whether to refuse, but how to refuse in a way that ended the manipulation instead of feeding it new angles. By the time I got home, Diane had left 2 voicemails and Jason had sent a single text. I need to know if I can count on you. Not can the kids count on you. Not can we talk. I can count on you. I stared at those 6 words until I felt strangely calm. For the first time, I understood that helping the children and helping Jason were not remotely the same act. Then I saw headlights swing into my parking lot below. Jason's truck was impossible to miss, mostly because he drove it like the world owed him road space. He came up to my apartment without being invited, knocked twice, then used his own rhythm like he still lived in every place I'd ever rented. I opened the door, but kept the chain on. What are you doing here? He looked wrecked, and for one dangerous second, I almost believed it. Then I noticed the leather key fob in his hand with the motorcycle brand stamped into it. We need to talk face to face, he said. No, we need you to leave. He exhaled hard. Mom says you've been talking to Melissa. Mom says a lot of things. Jason glanced down the hallway and lowered his voice. She's poisoning you against me. She showed me receipts. His jaw tightened. You always do this. Do what? Act like because you're organized, you're morally better than everybody. I laughed once, genuinely stunned. You asked me to subsidize your life. It's not my life. It's the kids. Then why was your apartment shortfall folded into daycare? He went still. That was answer enough, but he pushed anyway. You have no idea what divorce costs. I know what a motorcycle costs. His face changed. Not guilt. Fury. Clean, sudden fury at being seen accurately. She sent you that? You sent it to yourself when you bought it. He stepped closer. You think you're some kind of hero here? You think Melissa tells the truth? She wants to erase me. No, I said. She wants you to pay for your children before your toys. For a moment, I thought he might shove the door. Instead, he switched tactics so fast it made me cold. Caleb, he said softly, I'm your brother. There it was. The blood card. The old spell. When I was sleeping in my car after college, I said, you had a spare room and told me your girlfriend needed privacy. That was years ago. Exactly. His eyes flickered. He remembered. Of course he did. He just hadn't expected me to remember too. Then he said the only thing all night that almost worked. If you don't help, Mom and Dad will lose the house trying. I felt the ground shift under me. Jason saw it happen and smiled, just a little. That was when I realized the blackmail ran deeper than I thought. The next morning I called Tom first. Not because I trusted him. Jason's last line had been designed for damage, and I needed to know if it was another lie. Dad answered on the second ring. Caleb, is the house in trouble? He was quiet long enough to tell me yes before he said anything at all. We've had to help your brother more than expected. How much? That isn't your concern. I almost hung up. Instead, I forced myself to stay steady. It became my concern the second you tried to draft me into it. He exhaled through his nose. Your mother and I took a home equity line last year for renovations and some temporary support. Temporary. Another favorite word. Temporary support. Private mistakes. Family obligation. They wrapped dysfunction in respectable language until it almost passed for principle. How much of that line went to Jason? More silence. Then, enough. That answer told me what I needed. The kids were not the first emergency fund. My parents' house had been. I spent that afternoon building a timeline on my laptop. Dates of transfers. Court filing dates Melissa had shared. The deleted motorcycle post. The inflated school costs. Jason's text to Diane about getting me to cover $1,500 a month. Tom's admission about the equity line. Laid out in order, the strategy was obvious. Jason had drained my parents, and instead of confronting him honestly, they built a moral pageant around the children to move the burden onto me. At 6, Diane called and asked if I would come to a calm family dinner Friday night so we could settle everything with love. The phrasing was manipulative enough to be useful. I said yes. Then I called Melissa. I'm done defending them in my own head, I told her. Good, she said, not unkindly. I need one more thing. Would you come if I asked? To your parents' house? No. Neutral ground. Somewhere public enough that nobody can start screaming and rewrite it later. She hesitated for 2 seconds. If this ends the lies, yes. So I booked a back room at a casual Italian place Jason liked because he thought it looked nicer than it was, and I texted the family that I wanted one final conversation about support. I didn't mention the folder in my backpack or the copies in my car. Friday night, my mother arrived smiling too brightly, which in our family meant she felt in control. Tom sat beside her, composed and tired. Jason came last, glanced around the private room, and gave me a suspicious look when he saw there was no food on the table yet, just water glasses and my closed folder. What is this? He asked. The conversation you wanted, I said. Diane folded her napkin into her lap. Caleb, before we start, I want to say how much this means to us. Family heals when people choose generosity. I opened the folder. Great, I said. Then let's be generous with the truth. The room changed immediately. Not dramatically, just a subtle pulling inward, like air leaving something sealed. I started with the easy pieces. School fees, daycare invoices, insurance summaries. I slid each page across the table as I named the lie attached to it. This number is inflated. This one is already covered by Melissa's plan. This line item is your electric bill, Mom. Diane's face flushed. That was household strain connected to the children. No, I said. That was you trying to bury your own costs inside theirs. Jason leaned back and laughed like I was embarrassing myself. So what? You brought paperwork to dinner? You brought a fake budget to dinner first. Then I placed the screenshot of his text to Diane on the table. If Caleb covers $1,500 monthly, I can breathe again. Just tell him it's mostly for the kids. Tom's eyes dropped. Diane didn't touch the page. Jason stared at it for 1 second too long and then reached for indignation. You got that from Melissa? Are you kidding me? I got the motorcycle photo from Melissa too. That one hit harder. His neck went red. My mother tried to regroup. This is cruel. He's been under enormous emotional pressure. So were the kids when you used their school picture to guilt me. Tom finally spoke. Enough. I turned to him. Not yet. Tell Jason how much of your home equity line you already used on him. Jason's head snapped toward him. Diane's mouth actually opened. There it was, the one fact Jason hadn't known I had. For the first time all night, my brother looked genuinely afraid. What happened next wasn't a dramatic confession. It was better. It was a collapse in layers. Jason turned to Tom. You told him? Tom looked older than I'd seen him in years. You left me little choice. That's not an answer. It's the only one you earned, I said. Diane tried to seize control, voice sharp and trembling. This should have stayed private. Private for who? I asked. The children? Or the adults lying about them? Jason shoved his chair back, so hard it hit the wall. You always wanted this. I stood too. Wanted what? To find out my family sees me as an account balance? His face twisted. You love acting above us. No, I said louder now. I hate that you keep making disaster and everyone else keeps calling it need. The manager peeked in once, then wisely retreated when Tom raised a hand and said we were fine. We were not fine. We were just finally honest. Tom rubbed both hands over his face. The line is nearly maxed out. Diane turned on him. Don't. But he kept going. Maybe because he was tired. Maybe because I dragged the secret into fluorescent light and there was no elegant way to put it back. We covered his rent twice, he said. His attorney retainer. Car arrears. Credit cards. Then the bike. Jason snapped. I said I'd sell the bike. You said that after you bought it, I said. Diane's eyes filled with tears, and for a second I saw not a villain but a woman who had spent decades confusing rescue with love until she couldn't tell the difference anymore. That didn't excuse her. It just made her human. So what now, she whispered. Do we just let the children suffer? I took out the final paper from my folder, a prepaid summer program form Melissa had emailed me that afternoon, and signed. No, I said. I'll help exactly once, and not through any of you. I laid the form down. I will pay the summer camp deposit directly to the program when enrollment opens. That's it. No cash. No transfers. No family budget. No rescue fund. Jason laughed bitterly. You think that makes you noble? No, I said. I think it makes me finished. Then my mother said something so revealing the whole room went quiet. She looked at the camp form, then at me, and said, but that doesn't help us. Not them. Not Jason. Us. There it was, stripped clean. For years I'd thought the deepest wound in my family was favoritism. But sitting there with water rings on the table and my mother staring at direct help for her grandchildren like it was the wrong answer, I understood the bigger truth. They had stopped seeing me as a son whenever my usefulness was easier to reach than my feelings. I stood there for a second longer, looking at all three of them. Tom, deflated and gray. Diane, wounded by exposure more than remorse. Jason, furious that the machine had broken in front of him. Then I picked up my keys. If the kids need something specific, I said, Melissa can send it to me and I'll decide case by case. School fees, medical copays, shoes, things with receipts. I will not give you money to manage. Ever. Diane started crying for real then. You're tearing this family apart. I surprised myself by answering calmly. No, I'm just refusing to be the glue. I walked out before anyone could turn my boundary into another debate. Outside, the air smelled like rain and garlic from the kitchen vent. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel and shook for a full minute, not because I doubted what I'd done, but because I knew exactly what it cost. There is grief in telling the truth when the lie was your place at the table. The aftermath was messy, just not how my parents expected. Two relatives stopped speaking to me. One cousin quietly apologized. Tom sent a short message 3 weeks later. I should have been honest sooner. Diane sent 5 paragraphs about betrayal and prayer, and none of them mentioned the children. Jason sold the motorcycle, though not before posting one last caption about fake loyalty. Melissa enrolled the kids in summer camp. I paid the deposit directly. I also sent backpacks in August, ordered from the school supply list, with gift receipts tucked inside, because control had become something I respected too much to disguise as generosity.